My name is Cindy Fan. I'm professor of geography at UCLA, also vice provost for international studies and global engagement. And about 7 months ago, Chancellor Jean Block, Dean Julia Olien of the Anderson School of Management, and Dean Marcelo Suarez Orozco of the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, and myself traveled to South America, including Santiago. That's my first time to Santiago, so I was completely thrilled and excited. And we had a number of very productive meetings, including meeting with President Michelle Bachelet and her predecessor, President Piñera, separately in different locations, different times of that day. We also met with CONICET and the National Innovation Council. And soon after, the president of National Innovation Council, Gonzalo Rivas, also visited UCLA. And we also visited University of Chile and met with the rector and the provost. So very interesting and productive meetings. In our conversations, we touched on many things in common between Chile and California, such as water management, earthquake preparedness, diversity and equity. So many things to discuss. And in fact, California and Chile, our relationship goes way back. The Chile-California program was first launched in 1963. And this bilateral collaboration called a Strategic Partnership for the 21st Century was renewed in June 2008 between President Bachelet and the then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. In fact, Ambassador this morning told me that Governor Schwarzenegger at that time said that that was the first time that his name was pronounced correctly, and that was by President Bachelet. And then later that year, the Chile-California Program on Human Capital Development was further reinforced through an agreement between the University of California and the Chilean government with the purpose of encouraging more Chilean students to come to California to pursue advanced degrees. And in 2010, President Piñera also visited California and renewed the Chile-California Council, and I believe Professor Sebastian Edwards is a member of that council. And we also have the director of the Chile-California Council in the audience today with us. So zooming into UCLA, UCLA has agreements with CONICET, University of Chile, and the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. And the number of students from Chile to UCLA has been on the rise. And currently, we have about 50 students from Chile studying at UCLA. And since 2013, more than 30 students from Chile have been, at UCLA, have been sponsored by CONICET. So we are a beneficiary of the generosity of the Chilean government. Zooming into the UCLA Anderson School of Management. Earlier this year, Anderson hosted the 5th MBA Chile conference, the first time that the conference was hosted in the West Coast of the United States and also in a public university. And each year, UCLA Anderson hosts a very popular conference called Latin America Business Conference. And this year, it was joined by UCLA alumnus and the former US Ambassador to Chile, Alejandro Wolf. So I think it's the love affair between Anderson and Chile is a long-standing one. Over the last 4 years, the applications from Chile to the MBA program has quadrupled, if not more. So currently, there are actually 15 Chileans enrolled in the UCLA Anderson MBA program. This is the 6th largest international contingent of students at the Anderson School MBA program after China, India, South Korea, Brazil, and Taiwan. And if you consider the populations of China and India, each more than 1 billion people, and the population of Chile is? 17 million.
We don't know.
So that is saying something about our relationship with Chile. that we are rivaling, Chile is rivaling, China, India, South Korea, and so on. And earlier this year, nearly 40 students from UAI's MBA program came to Anderson for a one-week program. And a number of UCLA Anderson students have also received funding from Startup Chile. And earlier this year, when I was in Santiago, I was very delighted to see the very strong Anderson alumni in Chile. And in fact, they are very proud of the role that they play in recruiting students from Chile to UCLA Anderson. And finally, UCLA Anderson faculty, among the faculty, there are at least 4 faculty members from Chile: Professor Sebastian Edwards, Professor Eduardo Schwartz, Professor Felipe Caro, and Professor Fernanda Bravo. So, and we hope that the number will increase in the future. So I would like to now thank the organizer and host of today's event, the UCLA Center for Global Management, directed by Professor Sebastian Edwards, and of course the incredible executive director, Lucy Allard, sitting in the front here. UCLA Latin American Institute, directed by Professor Kevin Tarasiano. Center for Southern Cone Studies, directed by Professor Veronica Cortines. By the way, Professor Cortines just received last December the oldest and most prestigious literature prize from Chile, so congratulations. And both these units, Latin American Institute and the Center for Southern Cone Studies, are within the International Institute directed by Professor Chris Erison, also an Anderson faculty. And also, the last sponsor I wanted to thank is the Latin American Business Association in the Anderson School, and the co-president is Patricio Jose Abalos Lira. Well, I'd like to also introduce a couple of individuals from the ambassador's delegation. Consul General Jorge Tagle, please stand. Is my favorite Consul General. His hugs and laughters are very contagious. And I'm trying to make sure that I have your name right. And Rodrigo Maladich, sorry. Trade Commissioner of Chile in Los Angeles. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest of honor and speaker, Juan Gabriel Valdés, Ambassador of Chile to the United States. The bio here. Ambassador Valdés was Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Chile, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Chile to the UN, Ambassador of Chile to Spain and Argentina. He also served as Special Representative of the Secretary General of the UN and Chief of the UN mission in Haiti, a country very much in our thoughts now in the aftermath of Hurricane Matthew. In 2008, he organized under the auspices of the Presidency of Chile a public foundation dedicated to the promotion of Chile in the world called Imagen de Chile. And since 2010, he has been a consultant for the Economic Commission for Latin America of the United Nations and also of the Development Bank for Latin America. Today, he'll be speaking on Chile's important strategic relationship with the United States and Asia, which is directly relevant to Los Angeles, to UCLA, to where we are, in the sort of middle between the two continents, Latin America and Asia. And his presentation will be, at the end of his presentation, he'll be joined by Professor Sebastian Edwards for a moderated discussion, and then there'll be time for questions from the audience. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Juan Gabriel Valdés.
¿Hablar de acá? Mejor.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the presentation. And I want to say that I'm extremely happy to be here. This is a very famous university in Chile. We are perfectly aware that it is a place where our students come and not only have an extraordinary experience, but that their contribution in Chile is important to us. As it was said, the importance of California for us has always existed, but since the recreation of the Chile-California Council, and we have his coordinator Juan Ibáñez here with us, this linkage between California and Chile is developing once again with an enormous enthusiasm and with enormous possibilities of real cooperation among us. More than giving a talk or a long speech, I would like to make some points on the present relationship between the United States and Chile, and on the way in which we look at the Asia-Pacific area at present. As you know, diplomats very often use the expression strategic alliances. And sometimes they are just nice words that are pronounced on occasion of the visit of a president. But in this case, I would say that Chile has come to develop with the United States a type of relationship which is so stable and so based on trust that when we meet in Washington and when we meet in Chile, one has to say that there is a certain complicity in the way in which we look at the rest of Latin America or the way in which we look at certain issues which are of international concern. This relationship with the United States has been particularly good during the period of President Obama. And I believe that one of the reasons why it has been so good, I was telling this to the Chancellor this morning, was because for the first time in a long relationship, which has had very difficult and tragic moments, for the first time, we have the feeling that when we express our priorities in terms of development, in terms of reforms of the economy, or the education, or infrastructure, even our international priorities, the US says, we have the same priorities. We have the same problems. We have problems in the educational system, we have problems in the health system, we have problems in the pension system, and therefore dialogue is not a dialogue between a country that knows the answer to problems and another one that comes and says, well, we are coming to ask for support in order to confront these problems of development. The relationship has changed in that sense. Somebody, I don't know if with good or bad intentions, was saying that there was a certain Latin Americanization of the US and a certain development in Latin America that led to this type of dialogue between us. But it is not only that. The participation of Chile in the Pacific Alliance with Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, initiated during the previous government of Chile, has been enormously appreciated in the United States as an element of foreign policy that makes enormous sense in the present situation of Latin America. We have introduced the idea that the Alliance of the Pacific is not the alliance of the countries that are looking at the Pacific against the countries that are looking into the Atlantic. This is not the Tratado de Tordesillas between Portugal and Spain. No, this is a sort of association between countries that share the same vision of the economy, that want open economies, want to be competitive in the world markets, appreciate the role of the private sector, but at the same time value democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and realize that their presence in the Pacific area is important for the century, because it is important in the relationship with the Asian countries. The fact that all of the countries that conform the Pacific Alliance have already trade agreements with the United States is, of course, a very important part of the common vision. And it's something that we enormously value. Since the beginning, the members of the Pacific Alliance made the point that this was not a political alliance. I have to say, this is probably not very politically correct, what I'm going to say is that there was such an underlining of the non-political character of this association that it showed exactly that it was a political association. What it means is that it is a political association in the following sense. Only 14% of the trade of these countries is between them. Therefore, it is not a trade association in traditional terms. We have to attract investments from one country to the other, and we have to open our borders for students sharing, crossing, workers going around this area. We are distant from Colombia. Colombia is not a country that is next to Chile, and apart from that, the one country that is close to Chile is Peru, with which we have had a very complex relationship since the 19th century. Therefore, it is an alliance that helps us to create a very strong bond with Peru, something we want, we seriously want. But it forces us to look at Asia, at the Asia Pacific, and to see the challenges we have with them. Chile has always pretended that Chile is a bridge towards the Asia Pacific, and this has been repeated by all administrations. This is what we call in Chile a state policy, matter of state. Piñera, Bachelet, or Lagos said exactly the same thing, or Frey. This is a bridge. Well, the point is that to be a bridge, you have to have the infrastructural development that will allow you to connect your country and your markets and your seaports with Argentina, Bolivia, and Brazil, and the Atlantic. In order to be a bridge, you have to have an educational policy that will bring English as a very important language in your own country, something we are still trying to do. In order to become a bridge with the Asian countries, you have to have seaports and that are comparable. Chile is not Singapore and is not Hong Kong. We have to, therefore, conceive our economy and perceive our type of development as oriented towards that function. This is very important, because if what you believe is that it's the market that will organize this, you realize immediately that you're losing your time, because the market will not necessarily organize this. You need a state policy that will orient your infrastructural development, your association with Argentina and Brazil, in order to prepare yourself to become competitive in front of the interests of the Asian countries. Besides, the Asian countries do not see the Alliance of the Pacific as their main partner. They see economies. They see Brazil, they see Mexico, and they see Chile. Chile is a country that has a very important, for us, relationship with Asian countries. But in general terms, you have to understand that when one asks why is China interested in Latin America, China is interested in Latin America for two reasons. The first is primary goods, and the second is proximity to the United States. And therefore, it is a fact that the agreements we've made with the United States and the trade agreements that Chile has built all over the world during these years, 30 years, are useful to our relationship with Asia. But we have to keep in mind that if one looks at the development of the world between these years and 2024, I understand that the data is that Asian countries will contribute in a 57% to that development and that growth, and Latin America will be around 6 or 7% in its contribution. Therefore, we are talking about very unbalanced neighbors or partners. But we have no other choice than to work together with them. And in that sense, one of the points that we have shared with President Obama and his administration is TPP. We have negotiated TPP very actively during the last 4 years. In fact, let me say something that maybe some of you don't know. Chile is one of the inventors of TPP. because Chile signed the famous P4 with Brunei, Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile, the free four. And then this agreement, which the US looked with interest at the beginning, but with a certain level of ternura, if I have to say it in Spanish, they looked at it with a certain tenderness. I mean, these small economies that joined together. Well, 5 years later became the basis for the proposal of the TPP. And I remember that last year, in which we have had doubts about the TPP, because we have already trade agreements with the other 11 countries that form part of the association. And it is not an easy thing to be precise or to point precisely to the advantages that will get Chile in participating in the TPP. I mean, you can say, for instance, that common rules of origin will allow us to form part of production chains. That's an important thing, of course. But if you want to discuss this in your Congress and you want to respond to the concerns that people who are against globalization have against TPP, and you argue common rules of origin, they will not buy it. Then this has become a very serious debate among us. But at a certain point, there were hesitations in Chile on where was this going and if it was convenient or not. And we had problems in the negotiation, particularly in the intellectual property rights area of the negotiation. And we went to see Vice President Biden with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chile. And we came into his office, and as you probably know, Vice President Biden is quite a character. And he received us in the room and he said, "Excuse us, you put ourselves in this mess of the TPP by inventing the P4, and now you're going to leave us alone." Well, it was, of course, a type of typical political statement, but it was very effective. In fact, the US recognizes that Chile was first in this idea, and that this idea has something to do with the development of this. But the main point today is that we are facing this enormous surprise of, after supporting liberalization of trade since the 90s, and I was trade negotiator of Chile in the 90s, and we were in favor of the free trade of the Americas position. We were one of the only countries that went with the US against Brazil, against Argentina, in favor of the free trade of the Americas position. When one has gone with the US, signing a trade agreement 10 years ago, which was a very important agreement for our own development and our association with the US, and one comes to the point to associate ourselves with the TPP, and suddenly you're told that the US is not going to ratify this treaty in its own Congress, and the two presidential candidates are against the TPP, it's a big surprise, to say the least. And we are quite concerned about this, because Latin America needs an open economy in the world and needs free trade. And the fact that today the Alliance of the Pacific is having an echo in countries like Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil shows you that the general orientation of the region is not going in favor of protectionism. It's going in the sense of incorporating this area of the world to the world economy with common rules, negotiated rules, understanding that each country has its particularities and has its own problems of development. But at this precise moment, the US decides to adopt protectionist policies is something that could become a very big shock and change in the international policies of most of us. Let me say that we have discussed this with the rest of the 11 members of the TPP. We have had meetings in which the main question is, what do we do next if the Congress doesn't approve this, the US Congress? As you know, TPP could not function or cannot function without the US. If the US doesn't ratify the treaty cannot be ratified by the rest. Therefore, the treaty ceases to exist, and we would have to think in another instrument. I wanted to mention this because of these are very important elements of our foreign policy. I haven't mentioned very much about our internal politics, but I'm sure that Sebastián will think something about it. Therefore, we are probably going to discuss this in the next minutes. One last point I would like to make, and believe me that I don't make this point because I'm here, but I have believed this since I came to this country as ambassador. The fact that we have this very stable relationship with the US, and the fact that we have this very positive relationship with the US, which, I haven't mentioned this before, we are associating ourselves with the US in the protection of oceans, in the protection of species in the Pacific area. We participated not only in the two ocean conferences that have taken place in Washington, but we organized the second ocean conference in Valparaiso last year. We have associated ourselves with the US in the creation of maritime parks, which are protected from industrial fishing and will fight against piracy in fishing in the world. We are associated with the US in the security operations that are taking place in the Pacific. Chile is, in fact, the Chilean Navy, the second in command of RIMPAC, which is the most important naval exercise that takes place in the Pacific area in the world, with participation of 17 countries, including most of the Asian countries, and including the Philippines, which is having some problems now with the United States. Then Chile is a country that has realized that as a result of President Obama's location of the new security scenario in the Pacific area, Chile has acquired a geopolitical value that didn't have before. And therefore we have a way of looking at our foreign policy which is different to the one we had before. Our relationship is excellent, but we continue to be Latin Americans. We understand that the neighborhood is absolutely important. We have an excellent relationship with Argentina. We hope the best for President Macri. We want to cooperate with everything he wants to do in Argentina. We didn't like, and I'm repeating presidential words in order to not to be politically incorrect, we didn't see with a lot of happiness what happened in Brazil. Frankly speaking, and we understand that it was legal and constitutional, but we would have preferred another sort of transition. But we understand that the new positions of Brazil will be important to solve the Venezuelan crisis, or could be important to solve the Venezuelan crisis. We have accompanied Colombia in its peace process very actively, with Chileans participating in the negotiation as advisors and participants. And we work strongly with the US in helping the Central American countries and trying to build in these countries resources linked to the justice system, the tax system, the health system. Therefore, we work in the hemisphere with the US, without the US. We want to solve our problems with Peru and Bolivia. This is an issue which is very long to explain, but if some of you are interested, I could respond questions on that. Anyway, the point is that Chile is going through a very interesting moment in international terms, and we have an enormous amount of work to do, which includes our internal politics, because without a healthy internal system, it's very difficult to be effective in international politics. This is what I could say as an introduction, and thank you very much for your attention, and particularly thank you very much for the invitation to be here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. What I suggest we do is that we're going to have a conversation, the two of us, and then we're going to open up to questions. We were a little bit delayed, so I'm going to Can we stay, Lucy, for a few more extra minutes? Yeah, we're going to stay for a few extra minutes so that we take advantage of Juan Gabriel. So Cindy Fan gave a very nice and a very complete introduction of the ambassador, but let me add a few things about Ambassador Valdés. Not only he has had all these diplomatic positions that were mentioned before, ambassador to the UN, to Spain, and so on and so forth. Juan Gabriel Valdés is also a scholar. And we are at a university, and for us that is very important, and it's a particular privilege for us, Ambassador, to host you. He has written, and it was published by Cambridge University Press, the best book on the Chicago experiment in Chile. If you haven't read it, I'm not sure how many have read it. If you haven't read it, I very, very strongly recommend it. It's archival work of the absolute highest quality. Juan Gabriel has continued, in spite of all his obligations as a diplomat, to delve into scholarship. He was also a historical leader of the opposition to the dictatorship. And he's one of the historicos. And not only that, but someone who, with a great sense of vision, of the need to rebuild the nation and the conversation among people in Chile, he was willing and very ably transitioned into these very important government positions. And lastly, Cindy mentioned the role that he played in Haiti. But the truth of the matter is that the continuous tragedy of Haiti, the suffering of the Haitian people year after year after year, and when it finally appears that they are about to stand up on their own, then a big hurricane comes and a tropical storm. Juan Gabriel was a real hero when he was in charge of the United Nations work in Haiti. So that's a great, those are all, and finally, I should mention this, we went to the same school, which is not a minor point here. So we are very happy to have you here. So let me the ambassador finished his presentation by alluding to the need, in order to make progress in the international relations, the need to have a healthy domestic political system. Chile in the last few years, as many of you know, or most of you know, has gone through a period of, shall we say, political upheaval, of a lot of questioning by especially the younger generations of the direction in which the country is going. And for a long time, Chile was considered to be the brightest star in Latin America in terms of economics. I would argue that it still is, but there are some questions and question marks that have been floated by some analysts. And so let me ask you quick questions on some topics. So there was a recent, which I'm sure you saw, a recent article, a syndicated column by a professor at Harvard that asked the rhetorical question, why isn't Chile making any progress any longer? And his answer was, because it has too many Chilenos. There are too many Chileans in Chile. Okay, so the problem with Chile is that it's full of Chileans. Okay.
We have no immigrants. This is what
that's the point. I want to get exactly to that point. You mentioned the similarities between the U.S. problems and the problems in Chile. We are now having one of the candidates here, very anti-immigration stand. Chile has no immigrants, but it is an issue that is lived by the very few immigrants that we have on a daily basis. And in the most extreme cases, say in soccer games, the public just shouts offensive. So talk us about immigration. I mean, a country that is growing, it's attracting people, but how is the country, and how do you see this as a challenge, and also compared to the US?
I believe that first of all, we have had, there are historical conditions of Chile that has led the population of Chile to behave like islanders for years and decades and even centuries. The way in which Chile is organized by a cordillera, the Pacific Ocean, a desert in the north, and the ices in the south, has created a population which is enormously desconfiada. I mean, they mistrust the surroundings, and they have been very hesitant to accept our neighbors and Latin America in general. This is the first thing. The second is the pretension of the exceptionality of Chile, which is very American, I have to say, in terms that Chile is an exceptional country, because supposedly we had democracy since our beginning, because the state was organized and there was no corruption, which was not true, etc. The fact is that this idea that Chile is exceptional is always made in comparison with Argentina, Peru, and Bolivia. The third thing is that when we looked at immigrants, we wanted European immigrants. This is not Chilean, this is all over Latin America, but the elites wanted European immigrants. Therefore, we got German immigrants in the 19th century, we got some Croat immigrants that very distinguishedly went to Punta Arenas or to the north of Chile. And these people made enormous contributions, of course, to the... But since then, and particularly during the last century, 20th century, we have had no immigration policy whatsoever. And let me tell you what is going on right now. Economic success has brought an important number of Peruvians to Chile. Important number of Peruvians. There was a moment in which there were 30,000 Peruvians in Santiago, and one of the most remarkable decisions of the government was to legalize them in one stroke, which brought an enormous goodwill from the Peruvian side, of course. We are receiving 25 Haitians a day, and we have a population of 45,000 Haitians in Santiago, which has changed completely the perception of Santiago, because Santiago was not a place where you found Afro-American citizens normally. We are getting an important immigration from Colombia, particularly to the north of the country. I'm concerned about this, not because I don't want the immigrants, I love the immigrants, but I'm concerned because Chileans, normal Chileans, are reacting very surprised to this, but with a certain discomfort vis-a-vis what is going to happen next. What are we going to do if this continues? We are receiving South Koreans that have installed themselves in Santiago and have occupied a district that used to be occupied by another very important immigration in Chile that I haven't mentioned, which was the Palestinian immigration. Chile has more Palestinians per capita in Santiago than there are Palestinians in any other place of the world. The point is that Palestinians in Chile are Catholics that left at the end of the Turkish Empire and went to Chile. They came with their Turkish passports. And
that's why they're called Turcos.
They are called Turcos. They are Palestinians. Anyway, the point is that Chile is not prepared for immigration. The question is, are countries prepared for immigration? Well, we should have more policies towards immigration. Not to prevent them from coming, but from trying to organize ourselves in a way in which this will add up to our own growth and our own development. This is what I could say.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So I hope that many of you will immigrate to Chile. And if you have any problems getting a work visa, tell them that Ambassador Valdés sent you.
Well, we have no visas problems.
There will be
Haitians have no visas, for instance. They come simply.
And they can start working?
They can start working. And they work at the markets and they work in Santiago. And
that's remarkable.
They have incorporated themselves quite well up to now.
Yeah, I think that what's very important, just to close this chapter, is what you said about the 20th century. Because if we go back all the way to the 19th century, we have incredible, eminent immigrants, Andres Bello, Sarmiento, and we could go on with the list for a long time. Let me now move to something that is related also to what Cindy said. This is, as the ambassador said, a famous university and a very good university. But what makes me particularly proud of having taught here for the many years I have, more than 30, is that this is a public university. And it is a university whose main mission is to serve the young generations of Californians. Now, in Chile, there is this big debate about the university system in particular, and public education at the university level has lost a lot of importance. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, I know some of this, about what's going on, and how do you see this public versus private, and the merits of revitalizing public education at the university level in Chile? And if you can, if you want to, talk also about this movement and decision by Madame Bachelet's government of making university education free for a large fraction. UCLA is not a free university. It's a public university, but it's not free. So talk about, a little bit about this, because it's at the center of what's going on, and it will be informative for everyone.
Well, I would like to begin the answer with the following comment. Probably the most remarkable fact about Chile is that Chile tripled the income of its population during the last 30 years. And as a result of this remarkable amount of growth during some periods, not now unfortunately, a new middle class appeared. And we called it a middle class because we had no idea how to call it. It is not exactly a middle class. I played with the idea of becoming a senator at a certain point, and therefore I initiated a campaign in a very poor district of Chile, which is Valdivia in the south of Chile. And I remember once something that happened to me that is a perfect photograph of this middle class. I went into a poor house in which there was an old woman who was complaining to me because the government at the time had cut her from a subsidy to buy lumber for heating her own house during the winter in Valdivia, which is a very rainy place, cold place. And I thought to myself, I mean, this is 30,000 pesos. ¿Cuántos son 30,000 pesos? Nada. And then she's complaining about this. She's extremely poor. Then she said to me, I live with my daughter and my son-in-law that live the next door there. And there was a door, we crossed to another house. And then there was a woman who had a small negocio business, and her husband had a taxi. And she sold used clothes in the street, but not during the summer, because in the winter it couldn't be done, etc. And the two children of this couple were at the university. But they were not at the university. They were throwing stones in the streets against the police because they couldn't pay for the university. They had gone into the university and they couldn't pay the university. And one was studying journalism, and with all respect to journalists, there are too many journalists in Chile. And the other one...
And not enough newspapers.
Not enough newspapers. The other one wanted to study accounting. Anyway, what I want to say is that this was the middle class. I mean, it was a middle class that was in a precarious situation. I remember when Ricardo Lagos was presidential candidate, or Michelle Bachelet was candidate for the first time, she was permanently quoting the image of, or mentioning the image of, more than 60% of students at universities were students for the first time. Families that for the first time had access to the university. But the point is that these new groups couldn't pay the universities. Therefore, we had thousands and thousands of students protesting since 2011 in the streets against the educational system and against the university system. I don't want to get into that. The only thing I would like to say about these demonstrations is that they were not only demonstrations by students, they were demonstrations by the parents of the students and the grandparents of the students. There was a moment in which in Chile, in the whole country, there was one day of demonstration with 1 million people in the streets. Therefore, the government faced this issue, and I believe that the launching, and I understand this is a very difficult subject to analyze. Probably we have to not too much distance with the problem. The decisions that the government took were not necessarily to begin by pushing in favor of public education, but to begin confronting the issue of profit in education, which was a political decision which, to be very frank, I don't share. But it happened. And then the discussion was not centered on the importance of public education, but was centered on the issue of profit. And in this debate then came the issue of freedom of education, the freedom to make business, more than that even, investments on education, which had been received with a lot of applause in Chile, suddenly were seen as something that couldn't be done because it was unethical. This situation has produced an enormous polarization and debate in Chile on the issue of education. Now, what the government wants is to support 50% of the poorer students in Chile with free education, free university education. The government is also convinced that the transformation of education is not simply the change in the university system, because it has to be worked since kindergarten or whatever the name. And the primary and second education are critical. The capacity of the society to accept the possibility that children go to the same schools, even if they come from different social backgrounds, is limited. Chile is a very traditional society, and some groups are extremely conservative, and they don't want to see their children participating with poor children in the same schools. Not only that, the way in which it was presented led some poor people to say, I don't want my children, who are paying for their education, to go to public schools where they will be with students that come from drug addict, or I don't know, poorer neighborhoods. Then it provoked a debate which is very complex. I think, that's my impression, that most people in Chile had no awareness of the complexity of the problem that they were touching. And this is why this reform, first of all, cannot but be consensual. You cannot impose an educational reform on a society. You can lead people to options in which they will find themselves in a different situation to what they want or they prefer. But you cannot impose that. Therefore, this is a debate and this is a discussion that will continue to be around us. My only, and with this I finish, I'm sorry. My only reflection about this is I'm a fan of Chilean history. And if you look at our history, and you look at educational reforms in our history, they have produced almost civil wars in our society. When the Catholic Church was deprived of its monopoly over education in the 19th century, the type of reaction and the fight among different sectors in society was enormous. Therefore, I'm not saying that educational reforms have to be smooth and peaceful, because I know they are not. But I have to say that the level of commotion that this has produced in Chilean society has been one of the problems of this government in the management of the economy and society during this period.
Right. Let's open up. I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience, so let's start over here.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming. My question is centered around technology. So here in California, where arguably the most cutting-edge technology gets developed, I think it's very relevant in terms of the policies towards technology in Chile. And specifically, you know, there's this debate about university and how it's financed by students or the state, et cetera. But there's a big trend, I think, towards people not seeing the value in a 4 or 6 year education, especially with the low amount of investment in technology at some of these institutions in Chile, for example. So can you talk a little bit about how you know, public policy can address these types of issues, and specifically with the level of access to technology through social media and the internet that the public now has?
Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to accumulate 3 questions, and then the ambassador is going to. So let's run over here.
Thank you for this presentation. I don't think this works. But anyway, I'll talk loud. I guess my question was, Chile has always been seen, as you said, as a bright light, but it's also been a bright light on the ethical and lack of corruption, and even in the Transparency International Index. And in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a lot of issues around political corruption, SQM, et cetera. Do you think it's due to complacency? What are your thoughts? What is Chile doing to, again, turn the car around a little bit, because it does affect investment and the public opinion?
Okay, one more, maybe there.
What is the sentiment amongst Chileans regarding the pending U.S. political election? And what are the pros and cons for Chile, depending on who wins?
Okay, so technology, corruption, and the one question that you as ambassador cannot really answer about the elections.
We'll try. Well, let me say that with respect to technology and transfer of technology and the development of science and technology in the universities in Chile, this is an open question. What we know is that the state is investing too little in science and technology. And what we know is that we need to make an effort to change that pattern. Now, this has very much to do with what Sebastián was asking me about public universities and the way in which these things are going to be financed. I have the impression, not only the impression, that the private sector could do much more in Chile to support science and technology. Let me say that I have too many examples of companies that, in spite of the possibility of having the human resources in Chile to solve problems that they face in scientific terms, go abroad to find these same resources. Therefore, there is no investment by private companies in research and technology in Chile. I've heard all candidates, because there is one thing which is curious on this. I'm not an expert on this, therefore I look at it in the same way as you look at it, but I have probably more information of what is going on at the political level. There is no political candidate in Chile that is not preaching an increase in support for science and technology. Right, left, whatever you want. There is no candidate that is against the educational reforms in terms of the general concept. They might criticize the educational reform, say that it was very badly planned or very badly carried out, but Sebastián Piñera or Ricardo Lagos or whoever will become president of Chile will say, we have to continue in this process. We don't have to go back. Then this is important, because one of the things that I know Sebastián shares with me is that the secret of Chilean progress was the capacity to bring and make agreements among Chileans on very essential issues of the economy and development. And we need to recuperate that capacity to make agreements. And this needs concessions from everybody. The point is that the political system was organized in such an abusive way That probably when we managed to overcome that, there was a reaction which was uncontrolled in terms that, oh, now we have the votes, now you'll see. Then this reaction has to finish. We have to understand that those who win the elections have the right to propose their programs and implement their programs. But they have to consider the opinion of others, and we have to build once again a society which has to confront the enormous challenges of this international situation and what is going on, among others, the next election in the United States. Let me say something about that. Of course, we cannot give opinions on the candidates and on what is going on in political terms. That doesn't mean that we don't have opinions. But there are two topics in which we feel that we have to give opinion. And I have said this publicly. It's not the first time. First of all, we want free trade, and therefore we want the TPP. And we are concerned about the fact that this election is not considering the TPP as an important project. Second, we don't want wars. And we believe that if there is a war, the reaction will not be only in Mexico, but it will be in general in Latin America. And let me say why this is important, because my generation had to go through Nixon and Kissinger's intervention in Chile and in Latin America. And we suffered that. 3 weeks ago, we commemorated the assassination of Orlando Letelier in Washington 40 years ago, a former minister of Allende who was murdered with a bomb in Sheridan Circle right in front of the Chilean embassy. And the president of Chile and the sons of Orlando Letelier were there. And when we were given by the CIA and by the government, by the Obama administration, the secret papers around that murder, suddenly you had these images of the people who governed the United States at the time that, confronting a crime like this, reacted simply by saying, another communist is killed. Who cares? Then we have gone through a very difficult moments in our relationship with this country. And I myself and friends of mine who were exiled in Mexico and in other places, and who had studied here, had come to love this country and respect this country enormously, and respect Americans enormously. Then we have made an enormous work among our children, among our relatives, among the common people in Chile, to say, well, the US is an essential partner of our own development and is a friend. And Americans are a fantastically generous people. Then if you have an election in which a war is a central part of a policy towards Latin America, it's very difficult not to have once again back the Theodore Roosevelt period of visions of Latin America by the US and visions of the US by the Latin Americans. This is why I think these two topics are important. I don't want to get into the rest. Of course, in an informal situation, I would be much in another condition to give opinions. With respect to the issue of corruption, it is true, we were complacent. You're absolutely right. We were complacent because there was the idea, a very wrong idea among the elites, that given that the money that was circulating with politics was a money for elections, and therefore it was a money for democracy, then it was not important the way in which this money was organized. No Chilean was innocent. There were no innocent Chileans. I mean, if you went to Chile during an elections and you had to see the immense display of propaganda and money in the campaigns, I mean, you had to think, where is this money coming from? I mean, it's not coming from the candidates, evidently. Then who was paying for that? Obviously, it was the private sector. And the rules had nothing to do with what we were seeing in the streets, because the rules were quite restrictive in terms of the payment of these elections. People got used to that. There were candidates to the Senate in Santiago that spent $10 million in one election. Where did they get that money? Then when it exploded, it was like, I felt like I was ambassador to Spain in the moment in which the PSOE, the Socialist Party of Spain, had to confront the same sort of scandals. Everybody knew the PSOE was rich. And everybody knew that the way in which the Socialist Party got rich was because there were people hired by this party that wrote small pieces, small papers for companies that paid 100 times the value of that paper to the party. That was the way in which the party was financed. Everybody knew that. Suddenly, a journalist said, this is unacceptable. And it published the name and the type of paper, and it published the paper. And it was a scandal. Therefore, everybody knew in Chile what was going on. Now, I want to stress that even if corruption has been a factor, important factor during this period of time, the reaction of Chilean institutions has been impeccable. Because the reaction of the new justice system and the fiscales, the prosecutors, have taken senators to jail, important group of business people to jail, and are investigating people with no consideration of their political origins or their political orientations. And this is very important, because it is even better than in Brazil. I have to say that in Brazil you can put the question of why are only the Workers' Party leaders falling in this situation and not the others. In Chile it was everybody. And you have seen great political leaders and people of enormous value as a contribution to the debate. I can think of 3 or 4 names that have been destroyed politically because of the issue of money. Therefore, I believe that the new legislation of control of elections and of control of money in elections is a very, very important subject. It has been made by a great Chilean economist, Engel, who has worked with a team of people and has produced a very good text. Probably a bit too strict. I will finish with this comment. My son is a candidate next Sunday. And I cannot send him money. Because even if I want to do it legally, because I could do it legally, but it's forbidden to send money from abroad, then I say, okay, we have been authorized to vote in the elections. The consul will have to register all Chileans here and they will be able to vote in the next presidential election. But we are not authorized to send money. If I want to give money to my son, I have to queue in a bank personally and deposit a certain amount of money, which should not be up of more than 1 million pesos, in an account which is precisely established for his campaign. Corporations cannot give him money, only persons can give him money. Therefore, we have changed completely to the other side. Now, the problem will be, how would you increase the participation of people in an election if candidates have no money to promote themselves or promote their own issues? That will be a serious problem. But I have to say that I prefer this problem than the problem we had previously.